Perry Dunlap called me a man who plays Tetris with boats. He wrote that in an email to the board. I found out 3 days later, sitting in my truck in the parking lot of a port I had just been fired from after 20 years. My name is Walt Greer. I'm 54 years old. For 20 years, I ran terminal operations at Pacific Gateway Port Authority in San Pedro, California. $9 Don Horn, $92 billion in cargo moved through that port every year. And most of how it moved existed only in my head. That was the problem, apparently. The morning it happened, the marine layer was sitting low over the harbor. You could not see the top of the gantry cranes, everything gray, everything quiet. The crane alarms, the container locks, the tugboat horns bouncing off the breakwater. I had 3 monitors running live vessel tracking, a tide chart thumbtacked to the wall behind me, and a whiteboard covered in berth assignments in my own handwriting. My thermos was on the desk, steel lid, dented, 12 years old. Coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Perry Dunlap walked in at 7:48 a.m. He did not knock. He had an HR rep behind him, a woman I had never met holding a tablet looking like she would rather be anywhere else on earth. Perry did not sit. He stood across from my desk in a slim-fit suit, no tie, sneakers that squeaked on the linoleum. He glanced at his Apple Watch twice before he opened his mouth. "Walt," he said, "we are making changes. The terminal is transitioning to a data-driven automated scheduling platform. Your position has been optimized out." He said it like he was reading off a slide deck. Then he said, "The part I will carry with me for the rest of my life. We are paying a director's salary for a man who essentially plays Tetris with boats." The HR rep's eyes dropped to her tablet. She did not look up again. I looked at Perry for about 3 seconds. I did not argue. I picked up my notebook from the desk. Small black cover worn soft at the edges, 20 years of shorthand inside. Berth numbers. Vessel names abbreviated to 3 letters. Tide windows, crane assignments, dispatcher initials, a language nobody else on earth could read. I slid it into my back pocket, left my badge on the desk. "I understand," I said, and I walked out. "Before I get into what happened next, you need to understand what I actually did at that port. I did not come up through the military. I started as a crane operator at 26, worked my way to shift supervisor, then operations coordinator, then director. 20 years of showing up before anyone else and leaving after everyone else went home. Holidays lost to ship emergencies, 3 a.m. Phone calls that I took in the dark so my wife would not have to hear the whole conversation. By the time Perry fired me, I was sequencing 40 container ships simultaneously, from memory, not from a spreadsheet, not from a dashboard, from 20 years of watching, listening, and remembering. I knew which berths had depth clearance for a Panamax vessel. I knew which crane operators ran 12% faster on Mondays. I knew which customs windows cleared faster if you filed the manifest before 3 p.m. Pacific time. I knew that the pilot boat captains at Pacific Gateway responded faster if you called them by first name and asked about their kids before you asked them to move a ship. And I knew 160 dispatchers across 12 countries by name, by habit, by pattern. Carl, who called from Shanghai every Tuesday and always underestimated transit time by 4 hours. Every single shipment, without fail. Stu in Rotterdam, who would not book a Tuesday berth because he lost a cargo vessel on a Tuesday 15 years ago and never got over it. I never pushed him on Tuesdays. I just scheduled Wednesdays and we were always fine. None of that was documented anywhere. It never needed to be. I was always there. 160 dispatchers knew my voice. They knew that when they called my number at 2 a.m., because a vessel's ETA had shifted by 6 hours, I would pick up. I would remember their ship. I would know their crew rotation and their draft requirements, and whether their customs broker worked faster if you got paperwork in before noon on a Friday. That is not something you load into software. That is 20 years of showing up every single day and earning it one phone call at a time. Then I was not there anymore. Now let me tell you about Perry Dunlap, 29 years old, Wharton MBA. Before Pacific Gateway, he spent 8 months as a supply chain consultant at a firm called Vantage Solutions. Their main clients were meal kit companies and regional food delivery services. The most complex routing problem Perry Dunlap had ever solved before walking into my port involved getting refrigerated boxes to apartment buildings before 6 p.m. His father is Mort Dunlap, chairman of the Pacific Gateway Port Authority Board of Commissioners. Mort created the VP of Operations position specifically for Perry. That position did not exist before Perry arrived. It was invented, built from nothing, so that a 29-year-old with clean shoes and zero maritime experience could have a title that sat above mine. Perry arrived 10 weeks before he fired me. His first act was a 43-slide presentation to the board. Pacific Gateway 2.0 Digital First Terminal. Scalable. Data-driven. Automated throughput. He ordered a $1.8 million scheduling platform designed for regional warehouse operations, not deep water container terminals. He never walked the docks, never sat in the operations center during a 3 a.m. vessel surge, never once asked me how the current system actually worked. He did not ask because he already had the answer. He looked at me and saw an aging administrator pressing buttons, a man whose job a phone app could do. 3 days before he fired me, he sent an email to the board. Vern Tully, my senior berth supervisor with 22 years on the docks, got hold of a forwarded copy and sent it to me that evening. I was sitting in my truck in the parking lot when I read it. Most of it was buzzwords, but one line stopped me. I have seen scheduling apps on my phone more sophisticated than what Greer does. We are paying a director's salary for a man who essentially plays Tetris with boats. I read it twice. Set my phone on the passenger seat next to my tide chart and the high-vis vest that had been riding there for 2 years. Looked out through the windshield. The fog was still heavy. The cranes disappeared into it like they had been erased. I sat there a while, engine off, windows up, wasn't angry, just clear. Like I finally knew exactly what I was going to do next. I started the engine and drove home. Lorraine knew before I said a word. She always does. She put a plate in front of me at the kitchen table. Chicken, rice, green beans. The Tuesday rotation we had kept for 19 years. She sat across from me and waited. Did not ask, did not push, just poured herself a coffee and let the quiet do the work. Our son Cody came through the kitchen around 9, gym bag over his shoulder. 17 years old, varsity wrestling, 160-pound class at San Pedro High. He looked at my face and stopped in the doorway the way a kid does when he reads a room before he walks into it. You okay? Yeah. He held eye contact a second longer than a 17-year-old usually holds it with his father. Then he nodded once and went upstairs. Smart kid. Knows when to leave a room. We heard his door close. Lorraine set down her coffee. They fired you, Perry. She did not say anything right away. Just looked at me the way she looks at a shipping invoice she already knows is wrong but checks anyway. What are you going to do? I do not know yet. That was Tuesday night. Wednesday I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open. Did not read it, just held it. Flipped pages. 20 years of shorthand that looked like a foreign language to anyone who was not me. Every page was a week. Every week was 40 ships, sequenced, routed, docked, unloaded, and cleared. I closed it, set it next to my thermos, and looked out the kitchen window at the harbor. You can see the cranes from our house if you stand in the right spot. Thursday morning, my phone rang, 72 hours after the firing. Caller ID said Gil Navarro. Gil is the executive director of the Port of Long Beach, 61 years old, former petroleum engineer, 25 years in offshore logistics before moving into port administration. We had crossed paths at the Pacific Maritime Conference every year for 5 years running. Every year, same conversation, same question at the end of it. Same polite no for me. I had been loyal to Pacific Gateway. I thought loyalty ran both directions. Gil did not waste time. Walt, I have been asking you the same question for 5 years. The answer was always no. I need a different answer this time. Name your terms, he had heard. Of course he had heard. The West Coast deepwater port world is small. News that Pacific Gateway fired its director of terminal operations traveled through the maritime network faster than a customs bulletin. By Wednesday, 3 different people had already called Gil to tell him before he called me, Gil, I got fired 3 days ago. Chief Operating Officer. Full operational authority. No political appointees in your reporting chain. $4.2 million over 3 years. Performance incentives tied to throughput growth. You run the terminal. I handle the board. That is the offer. I told him I needed 48 hours. That evening I sat at the same kitchen table, same chairs, same view of the harbor through the window above the sink. I laid it out for Lorraine COO, $4.2 million. Full authority, 20 minutes from our front door. She looked at me for a long moment, hands flat on the table. You're asking me if you should take it. I'm asking what took so long. She picked up her coffee and did not say anything else. She did not need to. I called Gil Saturday morning at 7 a.m. I will take it. I started at Long Beach within 2 weeks. They gave me an office with a window that looked directly out over the ship channel. I did not care about the size of the office. I cared about the window. From that window, I could see the cranes. I could see the vessels moving through, and I could see the ones that were not moving. Here's what I did not do when I got there. I did not call a single dispatcher. Not one. Not yet. I knew the Maritime Network had already done the work for me. By the time I walked into that Long Beach office, Carl in Shanghai had already heard from 3 different contacts that Pacific Gateway's operations director was gone. Stu in Rotterdam had heard it the same day I got fired, from a pilot boat captain he drinks with at a conference every year. The network moves fast. It always does. So I waited exactly 2 weeks, let the news settle, let people wonder. Let Pacific Gateway's new system try to fill the space I left. Then my phone started ringing. Not Pacific Gateway's operations line, my cell. The number that had not changed in 12 years. When they called, I said the same thing to every one of them. Calm, no drama, no complaints about what happened. I'm at Long Beach now, same number, same me. Carl called back in 40 minutes. Did not ask about rates. Did not ask about berth fees or turnaround times. Just said he heard I had moved and wanted to make sure he had the right number. Stu called the next morning. He said, about time you went somewhere that deserved you. That was the whole conversation about Pacific Gateway. Then we talked about his next 3 vessel schedules. One by one they called back, and when they did, I remembered everything. I knew Carl's transit time habits. I knew Stu's Tuesday rule. I knew which dispatcher in Busan needed an hour's notice before any schedule change, or he would not pick up. I knew which broker in Rotterdam filed paperwork faster if you sent him a heads-up email before the official manifest hit the system. None of that was in any database. It was all still exactly where it had always been, in my head, in my notebook, in 20 years of picking up the phone at 2 a.m. and knowing the person's name before they finished saying hello. Within 60 days, $2.8 billion in annual cargo commitments had been verbally redirected to the port of Long Beach, not because I offered better rates, not because Long Beach had newer infrastructure, because when a dispatcher called my number, I picked up and I remembered. The system did not stay at Pacific Gateway when I left. The system was never at Pacific Gateway. The system was me. While I was building something new at Long Beach, Vern Tully was watching Pacific Gateway fall apart from the inside. He sent me short texts. No editorializing, no commentary, just the facts, one day at a time. Day 1 was a Wednesday. The $1.8 million platform assigned 2 Panamax vessels to the same berth at the same tide window. Same berth, same time. 2 ships that together displaced more water than a city block trying to occupy the same 40 feet of dock. Vern caught it manually before the pilot boats launched. He fixed it himself, rerouted one vessel to a secondary berth, called the pilot captain directly, and held the second ship at anchor for 90 minutes while the first cleared. Nobody outside the operations center knew it happened. Vern texted me 2 words that evening already started. Day 2 was Thursday. The software did not know Crane 4 was down for hydraulic repair. Nobody had told it. Nobody knew they needed to tell it. Because for 20 years I had carried that information in my head and updated it every morning before the first shift. Crane 4 had been scheduled for maintenance that week. I knew that. The software did not. 2 vessels got assigned to a berth where the primary crane was sitting dead. A 3-hour delay cascaded into 6. The second vessel missed its tide window. It sat at anchor and burned fuel while its cargo owner paid anchorage fees by the hour. The vessel master called the operations center 3 times, got a different person each time. Nobody had an answer. Day 3 was Friday. The Longshoremen's Union filed a grievance before noon. The software had generated shift assignments that broke the informal rotation system I had built with the shift foreman over 20 years. That system was not written down anywhere. It was not in any manual, not in any database. It was an understanding, a handshake that took years of 4 a.m. Arrivals and kept promises to earn. The software did not know it existed. It just assigned bodies to slots based on availability codes. The shift foreman, a man named Roy who had been moving steel at that port for 27 years, looked at the assignments and walked straight to the union rep without saying a word to anyone in management. Work slowdown started by 2 p.m. Day 4 and Day 5 were the weekend. Ships that I would have sequenced through in a rolling rhythm, staggered by draft and cargo type and crane compatibility and customs clearance windows, sat at anchor in the outer harbor. The vessel queue that had been 4 ships when I left on Tuesday was now 11. Dispatchers started calling Pacific Gateway's operations center. They got an automated voice system asking them to press 1 for English. Several of them called my cell instead. I told each one the same thing, same tone, no editorializing. I am at Long Beach now. I cannot help with Pacific Gateway, but if you want to talk about your next vessel, I'm here. 3 of them booked with Long Beach before the weekend was over. Day 6 was Monday. 47 ships at anchor in the outer harbor. The Coast Guard issued a traffic advisory for the approach channel. Harbor pilots were requesting priority routing for vessels that had been waiting since Thursday. Vessel masters were on the marine radio demanding berth assignments that nobody in the Pacific Gateway Operations Center could give them because the software kept generating conflicts and the staff kept overriding them manually, and nobody had a system for deciding which override took priority. A local news helicopter flew out and got the shot. Aerial footage of the outer harbor packed with container ships stacked up like cars on the 405 at rush hour on a Friday. The story ran that evening. Port officials declined to comment. Perry held an emergency meeting with his operations staff that afternoon. He said the word scalable 4 times. He talked about software integration timelines and onboarding periods and legacy data migration challenges. Not once did he mention that the man who had run that operation for 20 years was sitting in an office 20 miles south, doing the same job without any of those problems. His LinkedIn post was still live. Day 1 of Pacific Gateway's digital transformation. Proud to lead the charge. The comments had turned by day 4. By day 6, they were a different thing entirely. Longshoremen, retired harbor pilots, freight brokers who had worked that port for decades. One comment from a retired pilot captain read, "You fired the only man who knew how to run that port and replaced him with an app designed for warehouse pallets. Enjoy your transformation." Perry did not delete the post. I think he did not know how to admit he should. That same week, the Department of Transportation opened a preliminary supply chain disruption inquiry. A logistics journalist reached out to me for comment. I declined, but I mentioned that Vern Tully, senior berth supervisor, 22 years on the Pacific Gateway docks, had watched the transition up close and might be willing to talk. Vern talked, everything he said was factual, everything he described was something he had personally witnessed. He had the dates, the vessel names, the delay times, the crane logs. Nobody could touch it because it was all true and all documented in the port's own operational records. The story ran the following week. Pacific Gateway's board chairman did not respond to requests for comment. Perry posted nothing. At the end of week 2, Opal Carver walked into Perry's office with a printout. Opal was Pacific Gateway's CFO, 54 years old, sharp as anyone I had ever worked with. She and I had not been close, but she understood what my department produced, at least in terms of what it meant to the revenue line. She set the printout on Perry's desk and did not sit down. "We have lost $1.2 billion in committed cargo in 14 days. The dispatchers are not calling us. They are calling Greer." Perry leaned back in the chair that used to be mine and said, "Then get new dispatchers." Opal looked at him for a long moment, did not respond, did not argue, turned around and walked down the hall directly to Mort Dunlap's office. She did not need to say anything more. The numbers said everything. By the end of month 2, Pacific Gateway had lost $2.8 billion in rerouted cargo. 3 major shipping lines had formally terminated their berthing agreements, not suspended, terminated, legal letters filed, contracts done. The port dropped out of the top 3 West Coast terminal rankings for the first time in its history. The DOT preliminary inquiry escalated to formal federal oversight proceedings. Investigators started requesting operational records, scheduling logs, staffing decisions. They wanted to understand how a terminal handling $9 and $2 billion in annual cargo had come apart in 60 days. Mort Dunlap did not have a good answer, because the answer had a name, and that name had walked out of the building carrying a worn black notebook 60 days earlier. The board turned on Mort Dunlap, not slowly, not diplomatically. 7 commissioners who had rubber-stamped the creation of the VP of Operations position, who had nodded along to Perry's 43-slide presentation about digital-first terminals, who had approved the $1.8 million warehouse scheduling platform without asking a single hard question. Those 7 commissioners sat across from Mort in an emergency session and saw exactly what he was. The man who had handed his 29-year-old son the keys to a $9 and totter operation and told him to drive. Mort did not fight it. He could not. Every decision that led to that room had his name on it. The federal investigators would find every one of them, and he knew it. Mort fired Perry that week. Quietly. No company-wide email. No LinkedIn post. No exciting changes ahead. Perry cleared out his office on a Friday afternoon. The office that had been mine for 20 years and his for 10 weeks. Vern watched from the dock, said Perry carried one small box to his Range Rover. White, leased, still had the dealer plate frame on it, tires that had never touched the dock road. At the parking lot exit, the tires spun in the gravel. Could not get traction, Perry had to reverse and try again. Vern did not laugh. He said it was the saddest thing he had seen at that port, and he once watched a man lose 3 fingers to a snapped mooring line. 2 weeks later, a federal administrator took operational control of Pacific Gateway, career civil servant, 30 years in maritime regulatory work. He arrived on a Monday morning, walked the docks, toured the operations center, sat through a review of the scheduling software. Then he called the remaining senior staff into a meeting room and asked one question. Who was running vessel scheduling before the platform? Silence. Then everyone in the room pointed at the door I had walked out of 67 days earlier. The administrator closed his notebook and looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. So you fired your operating system and replaced it with a warehouse app. Nobody said anything about 90 days after Perry's firing. My phone rang. Caller ID Mort Dunlap. I was at my desk at Long Beach. Through the window I could see two vessels moving through the ship channel, a third being guided to berth by a pilot boat. The cranes were working, the straddle carriers were running. The operations center down the hall had 3 of my people on headsets talking to dispatchers in 4 time zones. My notebook was open on the desk next to my thermos. I picked up. Mort sounded old, not 62 old. The kind of old that shows up overnight when a man realizes he burned down something that took decades to build and cannot put it back together. He asked if I would consider consulting for Pacific Gateway through the federal oversight transition. Said they needed someone who understood the systems. Said they would pay whatever I asked. I let 4 seconds go by. Could hear him breathing on the other end. Mort, I do not break my commitments. I hung up. 7 words. 20 years packed into 7 words. He had 20 years of my commitment and threw it away because his son called me a man who plays Tetris with boats. Now he wanted it back. The answer was the simplest sentence I had spoken in a long time. 14 months after I started at Long Beach, my terminal surpassed Pacific Gateway's historical peak throughput. Not their current numbers, which by that point were a fraction of what they had been. I mean their all-time best. The highest annual throughput Pacific Gateway ever recorded in their best year, with me running their operation. We beat that number in 14 months. Prim $2.8 billion in rerouted cargo. Market share up 34%. Several of my former Pacific Gateway dock supervisors had followed me over by then. Vern came after 5 months. He called me on a Sunday night. I'm done watching that place die. You got a spot? I always had a spot for Vern. Perry Dunlap, last I heard, took a junior analyst role at a supply chain startup in Austin. Not VP, not director. Junior analyst. The startup folded in under a year. Underfunded, overpromised, the usual story. He is between positions now. His LinkedIn still lists former VP of Operations, Pacific Gateway Port Authority. The dates are right there for anyone to see. 10 weeks. He does not explain what happened during those 10 weeks. He does not need to. Anyone in the maritime industry who pulls up that profile already knows. October came, Indian summer in San Pedro. The marine layer burned off early and stayed gone. Warm, golden. The kind of afternoon that makes you forget this coast even has fog. I drove to San Pedro High for Cody's wrestling match. Varsity, 160-pound class. Got there early. Second row, center. Lorraine sat next to me. She had taken a half day from work without explaining why to anyone. The gym smelled like matte cleaner and rubber soles on hardwood, bleachers filling in around us. The old buzzer rattled your chest when it fired. Cody came out of the locker room in his singlet, headgear on, mouthguard in. He scanned the stands the way athletes do, not looking for anyone specific, just reading the room. His eyes found me. Second row. Center. He did not wave. Did not smile. Just nodded once. I nodded back. He circled his opponent for about 20 seconds, reading him, patient. Then he shot for the takedown, low and fast and clean. He controlled the first period. In the second, he worked a half Nelson, turned his man, and pinned him flat. The ref slapped the mat. Cody's hand went up. I was not looking at a photo on my phone this time. I was right there. Second row. First match I had made it to all season. Lorraine's hand found my arm. She squeezed once and did not let go. Afterward, the 3 of us walked to the truck. Cody had his headphones in already, cooling down the way he does. He climbed in the back and closed his eyes. Lorraine took the passenger seat. I took the long way home along the harbor. Through the window, Long Beach's cranes were lit up against the dusk sky, loading a vessel from Singapore, unloading one from Rotterdam. Steady and unhurried, the rhythm of a port that runs because someone answers the phone. My cranes now. Lorraine's hand was still on my arm. Cody's breathing had gone slow, and even in the back seat. The harbor lights reflected off the water in long columns of orange. I did not say anything. She did not either. They say you can automate anything. Turns out you cannot automate a handshake, a promise kept, or a man who remembers every ship that ever crossed his harbor. If you have spent 20 years building something that only works because you show up every single day, and then some kid with a fresh MBA and the right last name tells you that an app can do what you do, listen carefully. He is not describing your job. He is describing what he thinks your job looks like from a conference room where he has never once picked up the phone at 2 a.m. You are not replaceable. What you have earned, what people trust you with at the worst hour of the night, that does not transfer to software. It follows you, and the right people, the ones who actually need it done, they will find you. If this one hit home, hit like and subscribe. I will see you in the next one.